Welcome to the Mind Solution Podcast with Sara Maude. The Mind Solution Podcast is for leaders like you who are passionate about well-being in the workplace because you understand that a strong, resilient and happy workforce is the key to your organisation's success. The Mind Solution Podcast is here to help you. So join us every week where we'll share with you powerful insights, strategies and know-how to ensure that your people and your organisation are truly thriving from the inside out. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mind Solution Podcast, where today I am joined by a fellow Virgin Atlantic ex-employee, Alex Chisnall. And Alex is the founder of Podpreneur. I had to really work to get my mouth around that. And screw it, just do it. I love that name. And is also a mentor at Virgin Startup. And I'm delighted to see where today's conversation is going to take us, because we've already covered quite a lot of ground before hitting the record button. But welcome, Alex. Wonderful to connect with you.
You too, and appreciate you having me on the show. And yeah, we probably covered 15 to 20 minutes worth already. So I'm sure we should probably share that now.
Well, we've connected because as we discovered, we both have had experience of working for Virgin Atlantic, and maybe some of our stories we can talk about on this podcast. And as you said, maybe some of your stories of 15 years as cabin crew will go in your memoirs.
Indeed.
But I'd love you to just share a little bit more about your background, Alex, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, sure. So for me, I literally went straight from university in Bath to the BBC. So I kind of feel I've come full circle. I'm still in the audio space, but I've taken a really circuitous journey to get back into the audio space, which included 17 years nearly at Virgin Atlantic in the end, starting out as a flight attendant and finishing up as a manager there, through to, I literally counted them the other day, 4 different iterations of reinventing myself for starting my own businesses. And within that, getting reeled back into the Virgin Group, which my wife always said I would do, to work for Virgin Startup, which is Richard's not-for-profit business, helping entrepreneurs get funding and mentoring and start their businesses. So yeah, within those 4 iterations, the current one is Podpreneur, which is my podcast agency. I have my podcast, Screw It, Just Do It, bit of a nod to my former boss, and an attitude to life. And also within that, different iterations as a delivery partner for Virgin Startup, and from being in the health and wellness space, literally leaving Virgin Atlantic, retraining as a personal trainer, specializing in sports injuries, and launching an online fitness business as well. But ultimately, as I say, I've been brought back around to the industry that I started in, which is audio. It's just got a different name, which is podcast now, not radio, and undoubtedly far more popular than radio now as well, as you well know.
Well, you've got a great voice for it, I must say. I felt like I was in some kind of hypnotic trance listening to you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Very clear and articulate. Huh. And I love the nod to, as you said, your former employer, because I'd love to share the story of how our worlds meet. So we were talking about this just before we pressed record, that one of the routes that you consistently did when you worked at Virgin Atlantic was the Shanghai route. And it's actually in Shanghai that I met himself, Sir Richard Branson, quite unexpectedly, I must add.
Okay.
So I'd worked for Virgin Atlantic as an international HR business partner, and I'd been brought on board by a former colleague that I'd worked with in the travel industry. And because I loved travel. And I love the fact that I could travel upper class to all these places around the world. I kind of made it a point that I felt it was really important that I needed to go and visit my international HR colleagues, which my HR director at the time was quite delighted about, because I don't think anybody had ever paid them much attention from HR. So I made a point of delivering my services to them. And one of those places was Shanghai. And the country director at Virgin Atlantic said to me, he was out there at the same time, he said, "Are you coming tonight?" And I said, "Am I coming? Am I coming where?" And he said, "Well, Richard's in town, there's a party." I said, "Well, I didn't know anything about this." And he's like, "Well, you've got to come. I'll make sure your name's on the list." Now, he wasn't actually out there to do with Virgin. He was actually out there campaigning against shark fin soup.
Ah.
But all I could remember at the time was thinking, thank goodness that I've packed a dress.
So she
Real
can
priorities
go to the ball.
there.
Yeah.
So I rock up to this party, and it's on this beautiful rooftop terrace. And you will know from your Virgin experiences, Alex, that it was absolutely one of those moments where you're just in awe. It was just absolutely incredible. Free bar, mojitos flowing, and just it was in a rooftop terrace overlooking the Bund, and
lovely.
just exquisite, absolutely exquisite. And at one point, the country director, John, came over to me and he said, "Oh, come on, I'll introduce you to Richard." I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm going to get to meet Richard Branson." And so I grabbed a couple of mojitos from the bar and went over, plonked myself down next to him. And of course, he sat there sipping Moe and Chandon, and there's me with my two mojitos. I was like, "All right, you've got a drink. Well, you know, it's
Loading up.
Thought that counts." And so he started talking to me, and he said, "Can I ask your opinion on something?" I'm like, "Okay." And he said, "Can I get your opinion about flexible working?" And I said, "Okay." And to this day, I don't quite know where my response came from, but the most articulate thought, it was like my HR degree had suddenly made itself known. Everything I'd ever read about flexible working just suddenly appeared in my mind. And I was there and I was quoting things that were happening in France and the way that they did things there. And he let me talk for quite a while before putting up his hand, and he said, "Okay." He said, "I love you already. Would you put that in an email to me?" And I said, "Well, yeah, of course I will." "What's your email address?"
Nice.
So I get him to write down his email address, which I'm going to confess, I still have the piece of paper. You know, it's like where you get a signature from somebody in a band. I'm like,
yeah.
that might be worth money one day.
Yeah.
So that was that, and I returned back to the UK eventually, and my job. And then the next thing I know, I get an email from Virgin Unite, because one of the things that Richard said to me, he said, "We're writing this book, Screw Business as Usual." And he said, "I'd love to put some of what you've said into the book." I'm like, "Oh my God, this is like all my dreams coming true." And so I get this call and they want to interview me, and I'm like, "Okay, I probably need to ask for a day off." And in the meantime, I'd sent him this email. I think it's fair to say I didn't just send him an email about flexible working. I think I probably sent him a PhD on the topic.
Brilliant.
And so he sent it to the Virgin executive team to get them working on my ideas. So yeah, that was kind of my interaction with Virgin Atlantic and Richard Branson. But long story short, there's a lot more I could probably say, but I actually had already made the decision to leave the world of HR because I'd already started studying solution-focused psychotherapy and hypnotherapy. And I had this absolute desire to take all of this knowledge that I was learning back into the workplace, because I really saw the opportunity for us to share what it is that we need to show up as, and I don't want to say the best version of ourselves, because I think we've heard maybe that slogan, what's the best version of ourselves? I'd suggest it's helping people to show up as their true self, because we already have everything that we need to thrive within us. We're already well-beings. We're already capable of experiencing innate health and resilience. And it's getting people back to how can they experience that on a day-to-day level in a way that serves not only the individuals but the organizations. But I'd love to hear what your thoughts are around that.
I'd love to know as well, before I do that, have you ever used that email address since to email Richard?
Maybe.
Brilliant. So you're better than me, because I remember getting his email address once, and I never followed up with it. And then you just get, and again, it was in my 20s, and I wish I'd paid more attention at the time of what he was doing, i.e. building an airline. He had a record company. He was then he launched Virgin Coca-Cola. I remember going to the party in South Africa to launch that. You kind of think back at the time, and I mean, amazing that you came out with that from the depths of your knowledge, and then you followed it up, Sarah. That's phenomenal. But I was just there, again, taking the free drinks and the party and enjoying myself. And I think back now, and the people I've interviewed on my podcast over the last 7 years and stuff, and you thought, I wish I'd actually asked him some, really insightful questions about how he's grown such amazingly successful businesses at a relatively young age. At the time, I think, I was in my 20s. I think he was probably only like 39 or 40 or something like that. He had the airline and the record company, etc. And these huge staffs that were growing with thousands of people as well, which is where you came in. But I wish I'd been a bit more professional at the time, I think. But then I'd never thought of starting my business back then. It was never a path that had even entered my head. So why would I think of those questions? But your last point, I agree with you. I think we already have everything that we need, whether that's, to show up, to be authentic. It's just bringing that out of certain people. And you kind of, when I think back to joining an organization for the first time and being young, being straight out of university, and a huge organization, it must be, whether you're going into a startup with just a couple of people, or whether you're going to an organization with thousands of people, with all the red tape and the bureaucracy that goes with that. You just want those leaders in a company to be able to, shine a light on you and be able to, do your best to your best ability, but to not feel restricted in any way, shape, or form. And for me, the training I had at Virgin was phenomenal. But back then it was still a small company relatively compared to as it became. When I joined Virgin Startup, I remember going to the Battleship building in Paddington, and again, even though I was in my 40s then, still feeling a little bit intimidated, because looking at the wall, there was over 200 Virgin companies listed being in that building, and you just get a real sense of the size of it. But you think of a leader like Richard Branson, and he still had that human touch, that personal touch. When we used to see a lot of him back in the airline days with Virgin Startup, he's meanwhile living on Necker Island. He would probably fly in once a year to find out how the business was doing, and you'd literally have like a quarter of a day scoped out for that business. But with the airline, he still used to walk around the plane. He wouldn't take a seat in upper class. He wouldn't go. He would literally just sit in economy. And I know that was all part of the PR and the marketing, without a shadow of a doubt. But it certainly worked with the public and seeing their reaction. But he would just walk around the plane with a notepad and a pen, just asking questions and taking notes, just asking about their experience. And the same with us as cabin crew, asking what it was like to work within the organization, what had the training been like, what were our favorite destinations, what we liked about the job, what we didn't like about the job. And I think just that personal touch is something that you want from your immediate manager whenever you join an organization, because to put you at ease and to let you really grow into the role that you've been selected for, because clearly you've already been through a process to get selected above other people to do that job. So clearly they think that you've got the capability to do it. But quite often I think we get there, we might feel intimidated if we're an introvert. You might go straight into that kind of natural default setting that you have as a person, and you don't necessarily feel that initiative to go out and as we talked about earlier, making friends. Some of the friends that I've got go back nearly 3 decades now, and I made them in that environment. So it's a great question to open up with, for sure.
And I really like what you say, because I know from my own personal experience is what really struck me from my interaction with Richard was I could absolutely sense, even though I'd knocked back quite a few mojitos, I could really feel that I was being listened to. He was fully present. He was in the moment, and he was sending out a very clear signal that he was interested in what I have to say.
Yeah.
And I think as a leadership quality, that ability to be present and to really connect, I think that's the word. It's connecting with people on that level that you can experience that viscerally. And you and I talked about this, that feeling of connection, that feeling of belonging. And as you said, you've formed friendships that have gone back 3 decades, and I'm the same. Some of my longest, deepest friendships go back 20 years through the workplace.
Yeah.
And you talked about this whole remote working, and we see some more hybrid working. We see some organizations that have reverted back to working from the office, but these organizations where people are literally just constantly virtual, I'm really curious where they are getting their sense of belonging and connection from, because I know I'm going to sound really old, in my day, those friendships, those relationships were forged outside of meetings. They were forged when you went for a drink after work. Yeah. They were forged when you went out of the office and you went and grabbed your lunch from usually Pret on Tottenham Court Road or Oxford Street. Back in the day where it was 99p for a coffee. I am really showing my age now.
No, and I think you're right. I think connection is everything. And going back to like cabin crew days, it's an interesting working environment because you're not office based. Your office is essentially in the sky for a period of time, and that period of time can vary. It can be 5 hours, it can be 12 hours, and again, you make that connection. You get through the next layer of connection. You develop those relationships through a shared sense of purpose, in that you are all in a destination, and that could be Shanghai, that could be Barbados, that could be Cape Town, it could be wherever it is in the world. You're all there with a shared purpose. You've worked, and now you've essentially got your time off. Your weekend is wherever you are in the world, and it's very much had that attitude, which I think came from Richard all the way down through that organization, to make the most of life. You only get one opportunity. You may never be in this place ever again, so make the most of it. And through those locations, be that being on a rooftop bar in Shanghai, or at the party in Joburg that I mentioned, or going on safari with somebody in Cape Town, or going to a tennis tournament in LA, which I did. It's that shared experience, and that could be somebody relating that to in working in an environment here in the UK or America, wherever it is, in an office environment, of going out to the park and having lunch with somebody else. I heard of something recently, actually. So just met somebody a couple of weeks ago, and he was leaving. He just left Xero, where he was incredibly senior role, to set up essentially an Australian version of the same company. And he said every single member of the company was virtual. They had, and I can't remember the number, but it was thousands of employees. We're not talking hundreds, we're talking thousands of employees. So twice a year, this Australian company would fly every single person from everywhere in the world to a location twice a year to spend a week together doing exactly what we're talking about, connecting. And this year they're all off to Bali. And I was like, hang on a minute, you're telling me that sending and it was something crazy. It was like 2,000 or 4,000. It wasn't double figures and it wasn't hundreds, but it was a couple of thousand people from all around the world. And he was like, the funny thing is, you think of that and you think that is going to cost the earth, not only just to put everyone up for a week, but the airline tickets. But he goes, it basically, if you do the numbers, to do this twice a year, it's still nowhere near as expensive as having an office or offices around the world to house 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people. And I was like, so who's this company again?
Is this Xero the accounting company?
Yeah, and it was the Australian version of that he was going to join and look to. Essentially, they're huge in Australia and they're very small in the UK, like a £10 million business, but they're $1 billion business in Australia, and they're looking to grow the UK. So he had to literally go out, right up your street, had to go straight out. His first job was to hire 250 people for the UK. And I'm like, that sounds like quite a big to-do list.
Oh, I don't know. When I worked for Debenhams on Oxford Street, we would have to hire 100 sales advisors for the Christmas.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, it's similar things. It's like, right, okay, we need 100 people. Okay, right. But it's really interesting what you said, because I remember quite a number of years ago now, I was doing a team building event with RBS, the Royal Bank of Scotland. I was doing it with their marketing team in Scotland. And that evening, we were all having dinner actually on location, and I was talking to the marketing director, and they got together in a sort of similar vein, not 2,000 people, but in a similar vein, they've got people from all different locations together for 2 days. And we were doing some team building activities. I was also talking to them about their mind, the way that we show up, what affects our performance, all a host of amazing activities. And the marketing director was saying, I'd really love to do more of this, but it's just the cost. And I said to him, and it was almost a throwaway comment, but I said to him, well, what would happen if you were to see it as an investment instead of a cost?
100%.
And he didn't say anything. And the conversation sort of moved on. But the next day, when he did a closing speech, he said, I was talking to somebody last night who really got me to see something from a completely different perspective. And it was amazing how that one comment had just landed with him in a way that had really shifted his perspective of what the return on investment is, of bringing people together in a way that wasn't just about team building, but there was strategic work that came out of it. There was personal development work. There was having a bit of fun on an evening. There was, there was drinks, there was dinner. There was something which forged relationships and forged those feelings of connection and belonging that, you know, we need, my view is we need that to really connect with one another. But what are your thoughts?
No, 100% agree with you. 100% agree with you. And I think that's what's been accelerated when it comes to cutbacks through the pandemic. And I know that from friends in different organizations like Virgin Atlantic, with a number of, you know, cabin crew that have been cut on the flights, and the services that have been cut. So I said before, my wife was an in-flight beauty therapist with Virgin Atlantic, and, you know, I was cabin crew. And that's how we met. The first thing that they cut was the 300 beauty therapists, because they still knew you could still fly somebody from A to B, and they didn't necessarily need a manicure or massage or a facial. So I get that, but you still see, you know, those iconic organizations when you watch different hospitality programs on TV, that, you know, the different hotels and resorts in the world where they haven't cut things like that. You're still paying for, you know, a certain level of service. And it's 100% an investment. I couldn't see it any other way, when it comes to not just looking after your staff, but nurturing, you know, the staff, the team. You know, we working with my agency, working with an organization at the moment, and their business is giving everybody in their organization equity within that company, you know, to incentivize people to feel that they are vested in that business. And he was telling me, and I think it was Sony, it was one of these big electronics giants, and he said when they did this deal, people got, you know, money that they could pay off their mortgages, you know, send children to universities, things like that, with the money that they're able to do that. So yeah, for me, I see it massively as an investment, and I'm sure that founder of that business in Australia looks at that as an investment in his staff, because otherwise, I think, you know, going back to some of the things you said, it's a very like 1D, 2D, whatever the correct phrase is, relationship that you're going to have with your staff. If you're only ever seeing them through this lens, it's a bit like social media, isn't it? You only get to see one side of somebody's life. You never get to see. I saw, again, somebody's become a friend of mine. I interviewed for my podcast, former England rugby international George Cruz, who's got a wellness company called 4-5 now, and they've got a small business, very successful, and they were out in Hyde Park, but they'd taken not just their staff for a picnic, but all their staff had brought their family. They brought their wives, their partners, their kids. And I just thought, it's such a simple thing to do. And yes, you can't do that 12 months of the year in the UK, but there's other ways that you can do that. And why not take advantage of, you know, the weather we've had at the moment to do something like that, to again get the inner circle of those employees who work for you vested in them, and being able to see what motivates them. I think things like that, you know, giving you a real insider's view on what makes that person tick, you know, because people react differently in different ways, obviously. You know, if you need somebody to stay in later at work, if you need someone to work harder because your business is busier at Christmas and things like that, you're going to build up far more equity in the bank as a business owner if you've got somebody like that on board, that you really invested in them, and you feel that you've also invested in their family because you're paying them a wage. Where does that money go? It helps to feed and clothe their family, etc. So I think, like you say, that person, that boss that you spoke to before, and it was almost like a throwaway comment. You just see, wow, you really are not stepping back and seeing the bigger picture here on how you can actually grow this organization.
Yes, and I think even, you know, we're a global trainer, and through the pandemic, understandably, so many organizations were investing in training and doing it online. And in some ways, it was wonderful because we were able to deliver webinars, we were able to deliver leadership training, management mental health training, and we were able to get a collection of, say, you know, 20 business leaders on a program at the same time. And, I remember having, managers from Sydney. I had to get up really early for that training session. It was about 5 o'clock in the morning. But we had, Cape Town, we had Namibia, we had, all organizations from different parts of the world. So did it reduce cost because it was online? Yeah, of course it did. But from my personal experience, it comes back to what we're talking about, Alex, is feeling of connection. And yes, you can deliver training online, but my sense is that people are fatigued of being online.
Yeah.
And I'm a real advocate of, when it comes to delivering training, especially if it's, if it's a longer program. I mean, I was having a conversation with the state of New York quite recently, who were exploring management mental health training for all of the sort of managers and supervisors that take care of all of the parks and recreation areas in New York. And I was like, I'll fly over. They said, really? Would you fly out? I was like, yeah, I'll fly over to New York.
You're right.
It's that value of getting face to face with people in a way that you can connect with them at a much different, a deeper level. For me, it changes the dynamics. Being in the room with people changes the dynamics. And I know, again, from my experience, what we're teaching people, what we're sharing with people, sometimes can get emotional. And if people are emotional, I want to be in the room with them. I want to be able to, I've had managers in the past where we've delivered face-to-face training that have come up to me at lunchtime and said something to me, they've shared, actually, I've been really struggling, and your training's really helping me to see why. And I just want to give those people a hug. I just want to hold them. I want to connect with them as a human being and say, what, it's okay. Can't do that on Zoom. And you can do the best that you can, but it's just not the same. So I think I keep coming back to this word, connection, connection, connection. And what is it that connects us? And so the idea of, Bali is like my favorite destination, or certainly it's certainly in my top 5. I didn't know Bali would be big enough to host 2,000 people, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I've never been, but I'm going there in November for the first time with my podcast, funnily enough. So I'm really excited actually as well. So I've only heard good things about it. And I'm the same as you when it comes to that. And that's yes, we're having a great conversation now. Like my podcast I've had for nearly 7 years, and now we've just been recording for the relaunch, everything in person. And yes, that's dramatically increased the cost of it. But if I want to take it to where I want to take it, then part of that reason are the connections that I make. And I've done in-person interviews before, pre-pandemic, and then everything went online. And now I'm like, do you know what? I want to get back to that, because I'm the same as you. I feel fatigued from all of those, meetings, etc., on Zoom, and all of the substitutes for it. And for me, just as you said, one of the interviews that I hosted the other week, which will be going live this autumn, was with a lady who had come from former Yugoslavia. She was sex trafficked and groomed for I don't know what the phrase is, like organ replacement, what have you, like horrendous story. And I could see my producer and engineer were behind the screen, like crying. My eyes were literally like welling up as she's telling me the story. She's just written a book. It's called Loretta Leon. And I could feel myself welling up. And you just do it. It comes natural, don't you, when you're in that environment? So I literally just got up out of my seat, went over and gave her a hug mid-interview, which I've never done in 500 episodes. But it just felt like the thing to do at the time. And, the connections that I've gotten from hosting in person. And again, you'll meet certain people who are, and they call themselves old school, but I don't know if it's old school. I think it's just humanity and wanting that deeper connection. And they'll say to me, I'm a bit old school, Alex, but I quite like meeting in person. So if it means that we have to delay this meeting a couple of weeks, I'd rather if you're able to jump on the train and meet me in London, or I'll hop on the train and come down to Bournemouth. And I'm like, you're speaking from the same playbook. I'm with you, So I'd far rather do that. And I think, that example for the organization in Bali will live long in my memory. And I'll think of them when I'm out there myself as well. But I know that's not feasible for everybody else. But as we said, on a smaller scale, going out for a picnic, going out for a walk. I mean, how many more meetings are productive when you go for a walk than they are than doing them on a phone, etc. And I think electronica anyway saps your energy as well, doesn't it? You don't almost understand why it should, because you're sat down having a conversation, but it drains you. It really drains you. It really does.
No, I agree. And I think, for me personally, I'm not a big fan of labels. So you mentioned introvert either before we hit record or before or after. I can't remember. But for me, it's not about being introvert or extrovert. It's where do I get my energy from? And I get my energy from delivering training, but in the room. And I can still put a great show on. But where organizations are investing, and I understand, we have a contract with the Department of Corrections in Wisconsin, and we deliver a webinar to them every single month. Now, of course, it's not feasible for them to fly me over to Wisconsin for a 1-hour webinar every single month, and actually it wouldn't work anyway, because they've got 10,000 employees, so we need to do something. So there's times where we need to work with technology, but it's returning back, as you say, to what is energizing us and what's potentially getting in the way of us feeling that sense of connection and belonging. And actually, is technology potentially a barrier to that? And actually, something that Richard, I'm sounding like he's my best friend, me and Richard.
Well,
Richard,
a couple of mojitos.
If you're ever listening to this podcast, then you've clearly had a very strong impression on me. But he said in an interview with The Telegraph, I don't have any time for religion, but I do have time for love, which I think is the force that creates us and keeps the world going. And I just absolutely love what he says, because to me, love is connection. It's leading from the heart. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, Alex, about what do you think organizations could be doing more of to spread the love as far as their employees go?
It's a huge question, isn't it, really? And I think it takes a Richard to come up with something like that. I couldn't. Maybe I'm wrong, because I've interviewed a few people who've worked with him after winning The Apprentice, but I can't imagine like a Sir Alan Sugar coming out with a quote like that. I mean, I might be wrong.
I do like a bit of Alan. I really do love his sense of humour.
his gruff sense of humour. Yeah. It's like, where do you start with something like that? But you could start with super simple things, for sure, to show your employees love. It can be, I think sending people something physical. I mean, I remember at Virgin, you used to get your birthday off. That always went massively well with me, I have to say. And I've heard of other organizations do the same. Unlimited leave, that's going to share the love for sure. I don't know how that works practically, having not being at Virgin now since they offered that. But I think it can just be, small gestures like that, giving somebody their birthday off, giving people, it was the organization I was with before, this workspace, which is like WeWork. It was, but it's owned by Ted Baker founder Ray Kelvin, and you get an Easter egg on your desk at Easter with Virgin. You would get a Christmas present from Richard, not just a card, printed like everybody else probably, or a huge proportion of companies are just going to send their employees a card at Christmas, aren't they? But you used to get a different present every year from Richard, as well. And I think it's, even if you're just looking at it, I think touch points throughout the year is really important to do, and something that I try and think of doing as well with my team, who again are now post-pandemic scattered all over the world with a podcast agency. But little touch points like that, when somebody's like in my team just had a baby, finding out, literally what sex is the baby, what's the baby's name, and then sending them like a personalized gift to have as well. Just little things like that, I think, is showing love to your employees. It doesn't have to be, the most common answer you might get by actually asking employees is that they want more money. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. That might be something that you say, but what you really need, and you see it when you, and again, I'll make an analogy with sport. You'll see why somebody chose to go and play for one team over another team. And it's like, because that team showed me more love. They made me feel more wanted. They had a host of suitors. And I'm sure it's the same for somebody going to a job. They might have multiple offers on the table because of how experienced, how skilled, how qualified they are. But who's showing you the most love? Who's making you feel more wanted, that you're going to be really, really welcome at their place? And I think if we just think around that, I think any leader will be able to come up with at least 2, 3, 4, half a dozen things throughout the course of a year that you could do. I really do.
And it's one of the things that one of the quotes that I love is by Maya Angelou, who said that people will forget what you did, they'll forget what you said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And something else which I think doesn't have to cost anything, and this is the direction that we should be looking at, because I see a lot of organizations that are doing some of the things that you've suggested, sending presents, sending flowers, all of that kind of stuff. But for me, my take on it is about consistency. And Richard said that my religion is very simple. My religion is kindness. My assertion to organizations and business leaders is, if we think about what creates that feeling of love, that feeling of being wanted, that feeling of connection, belonging, everything that we want people to experience, how do we make people feel? It has to start from the inside out. And that comes with how are we treating one another. And so kindness and the way that we behave, the way that we speak to each other, treating people with respect, listening to one another. These are things which they really don't cost anything. We've already got the ability to do this, but this is where my organization is really passionate, is creating that level of self-awareness of when we're doing that and when we're not doing that. Because we know that 95-98% of the time we're puppets on a string to the ego, to the unconscious mind, to the little mind. So if leaders particularly don't have that level of self-awareness, if they don't know when they're leading from the ego, when they're leading from the heart, they're just going to keep doing what makes sense to them. If they don't even know, if they're operating from a place of judgment, if they're on the drama triangle, like Stephen Cartman's drama triangle, if they're in persecutor, if they're in victim, if any number of things that creates those levels of self-awareness and helps to take people back to the truth of who they really are, which that kindness is there, but are we operating from that level? Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it does. Absolutely.
So We are coming up to the hour, Alex, and I feel like we've talked a lot about
It's
so many
flown by.
different things,
It's flown
so
by.
many different things. But is there anything that you would like to add or share that can really contribute to helping organizations to live from the heart, to experience that sense of connection, to take us back to leading organizations from that place of passion and purpose?
I think it's how often are you actually speaking to your staff on a one-to-one level? How much are you listening, as you mentioned before? And I don't mean just sending out a survey once a year, which is a tick box exercise. It's actually those leaders being present, those leaders actually speaking to the people who work for them, getting out from behind the desk, getting out from behind the screen, leading from the front. And I think those organizations that are progressive, that are kind, and I think, if you can just be one thing in this life, is be kind. It's something that I try and really drill into my two teenage daughters, and schools can be equally, like workplaces, a really tough place for a lot of people who don't feel that they kind of fit in, and it's not for them. And I always remember interviewing Rowena Bird, founder of Lush, again, another billion-dollar organization, and asking her about her recruitment practices. And she was like, "You see all the people with the coloured hair, with the piercings, with the tattoos, the ones that don't fit in. Those are the ones that we want. The ones who don't feel that they fit into that box that society kind of paints." She goes, "Those are the ones that we want. Those creatives, who don't feel that they've maybe found their place. We want to speak to those people." So I think it's recognizing that we are all very different. You don't want automatons all working for a different company, but you're only going to really find what truly motivates somebody by actually speaking to them. Maybe doing something, like I said, that George Cruz with that 4-5 was doing, and actually taking that another step further. And Richard was the same, bringing your partners to these events, because then you really find what truly inspires somebody, what really makes them tick. And you can use that to your advantage as an organization, because how to get more out of that person. When to kind of step back, when to give them leeway if they're having a particular tough time, to give them that space to kind of work their through, to support them when you need to be. But if you don't actually speak to them, how are you ever going to know that? So for me, it's connecting, it's listening, and it's supporting. It's three things like that I think for me are essential foundations for any leader in any organization. And for me, yes, I'm biased. I've been heavily influenced by working as a young man in my 20s to Richard, and then being reeled back in to work for him again in my 40s. But I don't think there's many better examples that I can think of anyway.
Mm. And what struck me as I was listening to you, Alex, is that ability to listen, and really listen, also requires us to be present, fully present, which I think a lot of people struggle with because they're mostly in their heads. But what occurred to me is we need to be prepared to listen to what's being said. And what's being said when we're asking people, when we're asking our employees, what is it like to work here? What is the leadership? Is being prepared to be vulnerable to what we might hear back. And this is kind of coming back to what I was saying about self-awareness and the role of the ego, because I would imagine that when a lot of people, a lot of business leaders, for example, that say, what what am I like to work with, or what's this organization like to work with? And if they get some real, what we might call home truths or honest feedback, it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of business leaders go into defense mode
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
try and defend, which is a very, when we've been triggered by something emotionally, we will naturally go to that place. So I think there's a huge piece of work that, again, it's any organization, even with, as you say, those engagement surveys, we can send those engagement surveys out until the cows come home. But if we're not prepared to be vulnerable to what comes back, things aren't really going to change. So I think that love, that spreading the love, is also being willing to put our hands up and say, yeah, do you know what? I really hear you. And it's not about being perfect. It's not always about getting everything right, because, organizations are evolving entities. They're sometimes going to get things wrong, and people are sometimes going to behave in a way that's maybe not great. But that ability to go, yeah, I really take on board, instead of jumping into, because I see so many articles that are about, we need to listen, we need to do that. And it's like, well, actually, what's the next step when you have listened? Is to go, yeah, okay, let's work together. What can we do differently? Well, that feels a really wonderful place to leave the conversation. So, Richard Branson, you have appeared numerous times. I have still got your email address, so I will be sharing this podcast with you. And if you wish to share it amongst your own community, then I will love you forever.
You so need to do that. I'm going to hold you accountable to that right now.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed having this connected conversation. I know it has been online, but I still feel like we've had a beautiful connected conversation, Alex. So I will look forward to keeping that connection going in the future.
Many, many thanks.
For everybody else, we'd love to know how this lands with you. So do feel free to like and comment in the podcast chat box. But for now, have a beautiful day, and sending you much, much love.